So I don't know how many of you guys have been paying attention to the news lately, but it's kind of hard to avoid what's happening right now. It's pretty big bombshell. Basically everybody in power in this country is a fucking evil baby eating monster um who either eats babies, molests them, or both. And I thought, I'd take this opportunity to explain why I'm an anarchist. you know. I've always been, ever since I was a little kid, I've always sort of hated the idea of authority. I've always hated the idea that certain humans get to exercise power over other humans, for pretty arbitrary reasons. Because you're taught as a kid that we live in like a meritocracy, right? Like you're taught that the people in power deserve that power because they earned it through either some sort of hard work or they're an expert in whatever their field is. And something you learn as you grow up is that the people that are in positions of power got that way because they're sociopaths. They got there because they did whatever it took, whatever evil shit they could to get to that position so that they could exert their will on others. I'm not saying like every single person in power is this way, but I definitely do think it's the vast majority. And it just makes me think, any sort of time that humans are exerting their will on others, I just don't see it as a good thing. You know, even I know this is gonna make me sound kind of like a edgy teenager or whatever, but even like the parent and child relationship, okay? And don't get me wrong, I know that you have to keep your kids safe from harm and shit, and to a certain extent, you kind of have to like tell them what to do. That's fine. But I think ultimately this sort of power dynamic that parents have over their kids is kind of ridiculous, and it leads to a lot of abuse too. This sort of like nuclear household with two parents that basically just get to tell their kid to do whatever. I've never kind of seen this as like a good thing. And I know this is like no one's gonna be on board with me here because it's such an ingrained thing in our culture. But I've always kind of just seen it as fucked up, that your parents could just exert their will on you as they see fit. Like I guess I just don't understand, okay, my mom queefed me out of her pussy and now I have to listen to everything she says and be her slave, pretty much. I know I sound like an edgy 14-year-old, but like really think about it for a second. Like why is this a thing? Like you created me just so you can sort of I don't want to say enslave, that's kind of like too harsh of a word, but like you literally just created me to be like your little pet, basically. That's kind of how I see like the parent and child dynamic. And then, you could also take that to another level, which is the dynamic between, citizens and the state. Why are there armed fucking police officers patrolling around, throwing people in prison for smoking plants? Right? Like, how many people. This country has the highest prison population of any country ever. And a lot of people are in there for just taking drugs. A victimless fucking crime. No one is hurt in this situation. And so it gets me thinking, it's just such bullshit. And they'll tell you it's to keep you safe. It's to make sure everyone's safe. You want to know the real fucking reason why they're police and power structures? It's to funnel money away from you into the pockets of rich people, just like everything else in this fucking society is. Okay? Like really really put on your cynical lens for a second and think about why for-profit prisons exist. Okay? Why we have all these arbitrary laws against, smoking cannabis or ridiculous bullshit. It's so the rich can get richer off your back. Like that's all it is. And with this Epstein shit, seeing just how many people are evil baby rapists and, baby cannibals, um it's just I think it just kind of proves my point, right? Because I really do agree with the quote. I don't know where this quote came from, but whoever said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, really, just power in general corrupts absolutely. I just think that's so true. I don't think that you could be a good person and exert your will on others. I just don't see that as a thing. That's why anytime I'm like, any kind of job I've had where I've been put in sort of a position of power over others, I kind of let them skate by and do whatever the fuck they want as much as like I can get away with without getting in trouble cuz I think it's bullshit. I do think you're like a class traitor if you're like a manager. I do kind of think that. I know a lot of people are going to hate me for this video and think I'm an idiot, but I have yet to be convinced that hierarchies are a good thing. And I know the typical argument I'll hear is, oh, we see hierarchies in nature, so it's like that's just an appeal to nature. Like, who gives a fuck? We also see horrible violence in nature. Do you think that we see rape in nature? Do you think all this stuff is good just because it occurs naturally? I don't think so. I think we humans have a responsibility to be better than that with our level of intelligence. And I think hierarchies should be a thing of the past. I think they're bad. And basically every level I think they're bad. And I don't know, just consider my opinion for a little bit, you know? And obviously, on a political level, this goes for both sides. Okay, Democrats, Republicans, both of these fuckers were in all these fuckers were in the Epstein files, okay? Like all I'm saying here, it's not even a political message. It's just simply that having power over others makes you an evil fuck. And seeking power over others makes you an evil fuck as well. That's why they always say like the best leaders are those who aren't seeking power in the first place. And I think, George Washington, okay, for all his faults, he was a slave owner, he was a piece of shit. But one thing I'll say about George Washington, he pretty much denied power at all turns. He didn't want to be the president. They basically had to beg him to become the president. And I do think that kind of makes him better than most US presidents, which every single one of those fuckers is evil, okay? I recommend a book to you guys, A People's History of the United States. That book really sheds a light on what we're dealing with here, okay? There hasn't been a single US president in history that hasn't been an evil piece of shit. Maybe with the exception of Jimmy Carter, okay? I think he was evil too, but maybe, slightly less than the rest of them. But yeah, it's crazy, man. It's crazy what power does to people. And that's why, the society I advocate for is a classless, stateless, hierarchy-less society. Because I just do think that everybody would prosper more in that kind of society. Um, but yeah, I don't really know what else to say because I'm not really smart enough to speak too much on this topic, but that's how I feel about it. If you guys want to debate me about this in the comments, feel free because, I do like to get other people's opinions to sort of mold my opinion through. But yeah, this is where I've stood for pretty much my whole life. And let me tell you, with these Epstein files, I feel fucking super vindicated, man. Let me tell you. But, I think it's time that we do something about these evil fuckers. Like, listen, I'm not gonna Fed post in this video. All I'm gonna say is we shouldn't allow this shit to go on anymore because it's just getting ridiculous at this point. Like, are we really just gonna let these fuckers, just keep raping our babies and eating our babies and are we really gonna let this happen anymore or like I don't know. But yeah, that's about it.